Good morning. I want to welcome everyone here. So I want to give a little context to why we're here today before we jump into the legislation or proposed legislation we're here to talk about. We're a few weeks past the passage of a 2021-2022 state budget that is now larger than Texas and Florida combined, that increased taxes by $4.3 billion. And what we heard from our colleagues across the aisle was that, well, this tax is only on the ultra wealthy, right? So who cares about them? They can pay more. We're not taxing anybody else. Even though the governor removed the middle class or middle income tax cut, which, thanks to the efforts of the people behind me, ultimately was restored by the majority in the final budget. But today, on the heels of that, on the heels of this argument that we're only taxing the ultra wealthy to pay their fair share, now we have a bill, the Climate and Community Investment Act, which is sponsored by Senator Parker in the Senate, as well as Assemblyman Cahill. There was just a public hearing on this bill. This is a priority piece of legislation by the majority. There were 23 co-sponsors, and it would include a carbon tax of $55 per ton of fossil fuel emissions in order to reach renewable energy mandates laid out in last year's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Currently, New York's gas tax is the 7th highest in the nation at 43.12 cents per gallon, with California currently the highest at 62.47 cents per gallon. This legislation will raise New York's gas tax to 98.12 cents per gallon, an increase of more than 127%, and it would make New York's gas tax more than 50% higher than any other state. In New York, approximately 85% of households are heated with fossil fuels, 60% utility, 20% fuel oil, and 4% propane. Now, the money from this tax would go to a third would go to low and moderate income families, a third to environmental justice communities, and a third to green energy projects. Now, I raise that because the original gas tax was always about infrastructure. That was what was used to fund highway improvements, to fund infrastructure improvements for the people who traveled on the roads, filling up their car at the pump. This makes no bones. It's not going to infrastructure. This is being driven by the fact that we passed a bill which laid out mandates and goals that were aspirational, that we didn't know how we were going to get there, which is a bad way to legislate. It's a bad way to govern. But more importantly, we're going to put forward this bill at a time when, since 1990, and this is from the Consumer Energy Alliance, New York's emissions have fallen by as much as 95%. And I say that because no one here, no one behind me, and certainly not me, is sitting here saying the alternative is to let the environment go to hell. My colleagues across the aisle would have you believe that everything is a binary choice. You're either for increasing the gas tax by 55 cents per gallon, or you don't care about the environment. And that is simply a false premise. That is not true. You can care about the environment. You can do things to incentivize better behavior from our corporate partners, from our citizens. You can do things, and we have done things, because again, our carbon emissions have fallen by 95% since 1990. And yet, even still, that apparently is not enough. We have to put forward a piece of legislation which is, and this is not a tax on the wealthy. I drive a car. Everyone up here, our constituents, my constituents, drive cars so they can get to their jobs, so they can drop their kid off at daycare, so they can drop their kid off at school, so they can go to their second job, if it's still open, if they can still find it. And now you're going to increase their tax 55 cents per gallon. You're going to increase the cost for them to heat their homes in the winters in the North Country, where Senator Steck lives, in Western New York, Long Island. Doesn't matter where you live. New York is a cold state and you need to heat your home in the wintertime. This is going to increase that by 26%. This is easily one of the most myopic pieces of legislation that have come out of that conference in a long time. In the middle of a pandemic, we're talking about raising taxes on regular New Yorkers, millions of them, who take cars to get to work. 55 cents a gallon, 26% to heat their homes. This is a bad piece of legislation, and it is based on this false premise that the only way to protect the earth is to increase taxes, increase mandates, drive more people out of New York State. Just yesterday, we learned that we were losing a congressional seat as a result of the latest census. And I only bring that up because I know there are some folks on the other side of the aisle who would have you believe that the fact that we didn't lose 2 is somehow a victory, that we only lost 1 seat, right? Oh, thank God, we only lost 2, we didn't lose 2. We want us to doing something right. We lost a seat. We lost representation in Washington, D.C. And why did we lose that? Because we're losing population. We've had years where we've had net losses, and we're losing that population compared to other states. We're not growing at the same rate. Why is that? It's because of pieces of legislation like this, right here, plain and New York simple. So with that, I want to call up a colleague of mine, someone who knows this very well and who's been a strong advocate against policies like this, and that is Senator Pam Helming.
Thank you, Leader Ort. I just had a thought when the leader was talking about how we have this mass exodus of people and businesses in New York State. Maybe this legislation, if it's passed, this gas hike, maybe it'll reverse that trend, right? Because maybe, just maybe, people won't be able to afford the gas to put into the U-Haul. I mean, it's crazy. But I know, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues, but I think it's safe to say this, that whenever we consider a bill in the New York State Senate, one of the first questions we ask ourselves is, how is this going to impact my constituents? What impact is this going to have on them, their families, the local businesses? And I think you heard from the leader, the answer is so simple and so clear when it comes to this piece of legislation. It's going to devastate everyone. It's going to hit everyone in this state. Virtually every single resident and business in the state will pay the price. And as the leader said, according to the Business Council, this bill is going to increase the cost of gas by 55 cents per gallon. The cost of home heating oil, propane, natural gas will increase by about 25%. And I was talking to Senator Tedisco earlier today about how when gas prices go up, right, we have this domino effect, if you will. When the gas price goes up, the cost of transportation to deliver your food goes up. That's going to hit everyone in New York State. The cost of construction materials. A lot of us are working on our homes right now. The weather's getting nice. All those home supplies, those construction materials, the costs are going to go up. The cost of health care is going to be impacted by this. And I think about so many of us here who our communities rely on the economic stimulus driven by tourism. Tourism is going to be impacted by this increase in the gas taxes. And honestly, when we think about it, I think that the people most impacted by this are going to be senior citizens and people who are lower income residents. And really, it's going to disproportionately affect upstate New Yorkers who rely on our vehicles to get to our jobs, to get our kids to school, to their after-school activities. If you use gas or diesel in your car, in your truck, or in your tractor, if you live in a farming community, you are going to experience a dramatic increase in the cost of gas. If you heat your home with natural gas, with propane or fuel oil, you're going to pay more, a lot more. And if you power your business, your manufacturing business, with heating oil or propane, you're going to pay more. You're also going to pay a lot more, too, because of your supply chain, right? Those transportation costs, again, are going to go up. The cost of your supplies are going to increase. Our businesses are struggling. They're begging us for help. We're not through this pandemic yet. People are not back to work yet. I'm not sure there's ever a good time for a tax increase. I would say no, but now it's shocking to me that this bill has been brought up. Whether you're a CNA in Seneca County, a machinist in Wayne County, a manufacturer in Ontario County, or a farmer in Cayuga County, or you own a business in Webster and Lansing, you're going to pay more under this bill. I just wanted to mention on Saturday out in my district, there was a Recruit New York event. That's recruitment of volunteer firefighters who we rely on in our districts. And I had a couple come up to me and say, Pam, can we talk to you in private for a moment? I said, sure. And the first question they asked me, they were a retired couple, they told me that, and then they said, Pam, is it true? And I'm thinking to myself, is what true? And they wanted to know, is it true that we're going to pay 55 cents a gallon more for our gas? Is the cost of our home heating oil going to go up? And the answer was yes. If this bill is passed, it will go up. And the woman I was talking to was almost in tears. She's like, we barely go anywhere now. We go to the grocery store, we go to our doctor's appointments, and we go to visit our grandkids. How are we going to afford more to do those things? How are we going to afford to heat our house? What are we supposed to do? I think the message is very simple and it's very clear. Local families, our seniors, our farmers, and our business community, they can't afford this. The state can't afford this if it wants to compete for economic investment and jobs. Yesterday, I had a call with a CEO of a large business. They have a worldwide business, but they have a corporate location in my district. And I was talking to him about, how beautiful New York is and all the benefits of doing business here in New York State, but honestly, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, my God, if this bill is passed, if the producer responsibility is passed, it is going to crush that business, and they are not going to think twice about pulling out of here and taking the 800 jobs they offer right now with them. We really and truly can't expect struggling families and individuals to go out and purchase an electric vehicle for $30,000 or more, or invest $20,000 in a new heating system for their homes. I think about the restaurants and the bars that are still struggling, right? They're not up to 100% capacity. We're still pushing for that. The governor's still not taking that action, and the majority is still not doing anything to correct that situation. But think about those restaurants and bars. How are they surviving with takeout and delivery services? Now, if that delivery person has to go out and purchase an electric vehicle, and even prior to that, if they have to pay this increase in gas taxes, are they going to be able to survive? I think we all know the answers to that. So I just want to wrap up by saying that the argument that that this bill offers some New Yorkers a rebate, that is foolish. That is absolutely foolish, and it's nonsense. You go out and you talk to anyone in your district, and you ask them if they could wait a year for the state of New York to give them a rebate. No. Single parents are struggling, right? They're at the gas pump and they're struggling to get that last 10 bucks out of their pocket to be able to put that gas in their tank, to get their kids to daycare and to get to work. They cannot wait a year. This is a foolish proposal. It's a ridiculous proposal. We all want to do everything we can to reduce carbon emissions. We're this group right here, these Republicans right here, we are committed to protecting our environment. But the way to protecting our environment is not by adding new taxes. So I want to thank everyone for your time, and at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce my wonderful colleague, Senator Mario Matera.
Thank you, Senator Halming, and I just want to thank our leader for setting up this press conference, because one thing that I ran on is common sense government, and this is far from common sense. I am a preventive maintenance person, and this conference right here is called preventive maintenance. Everybody needs to get out, and everybody needs to understand how terrible this bill is for our residents. All this is doing is taxing us out of New York State. Our businesses, how vital everything in partnership and in recovery, what we've all went through with this pandemic has been serious for all of our families. People are starting to just get back to work and caring about getting back to work. But now it's going to cost them, 55 cents more a gallon? It should be going the other way. It should be reduced at 55 cents, not going forward. I'm in the construction industry, and I don't want to be redundant and everything like that, but just think about what's going to even happen with that. The construction is the backbone of the economy. And now what happens is now, even with the trucks and everything like that, the cost of all the projects are going to be up on a rise. And we can't have this. That's all this is going to do. It's taxing us again. I'm going to hear it 3 more times from me. All it is doing is taxing us out of New York State. You know, the leaders mentioned something, and I do have it in here, about the congressional. Just think about something. It just proves we're losing population here. We need to go the other way. My mom's in Florida. Look what happened with Florida. Florida surpassed us. I think they're at 22 million people. We're going the opposite way. We're losing supposed to be 1,000 a day. This bill, well, guess what? This will definitely put the nail in the coffin for our residents to leave New York State. Look at Texas, North Carolina, Florida, North Dakota. Look at all these states that right now are growing from our residents. My wife says to me, she goes, Mario, in 5 years we'll move into Tennessee. I do not want to move to Tennessee. I love Long Island. That is the truth, leader. So, you know, I know I'm going to be going on and on and on, but as our residents continue to deal with this financial damage of our ongoing crisis, New York State should be doing all it can to ease the burden they face. Instead, this legislation will increase the cost of our residents to get to work, drive their kids to school, heat their homes, and stop their household and shop for their households. Long Islanders have to unite to say to the Senate Democrats that we will no longer be their ATM. And enough is enough. Thank you so much. Now, I am going to introduce you to our great senator from the northern country in a beautiful Lake George area, which I love to go to. And you know what? And that's another thing that we want to make sure that our vacation spots, think about that. And I know I take it probably dance like I go up to Lake George. I'm sorry, I introduced them. I'm still going. But I'm just Senator Dan Stack, great man, thank you.
Thanks, Mario. Thank you. Thanks, Leader Ort, for putting this together. And I've got points that I want to make, but I want to first circle back to something that the leader said. I'm a big believer in repetition. It drives my staff bananas. I think my newspapers love it. But I learned it from my father, who was in the Marine Corps, that when you've got something that's important, it's worth repeating. And I think that the leader made an outstanding point. We've been listening to months, the drumbeat from the other side of the aisle, that they were raising taxes on the super rich. There's not a soul on these stairs, and I'm willing to venture there's not a soul out there on the other side of these lenses, and hardly a soul of anyone that's going to watch this that is in that super rich category. 55 cents a gallon. Every single person here on either side of the camera and on either side of the screen drives to drop their kids off, drives to the grocery store, drives to get to work. It is a backbreaker. It affects all of us. It is a very regressive tax. For the most progressive state in the nation, I can't think of a more regressive approach to taxation than taxing gasoline and heating oil. Imagine someone who can't afford to heat your home learning that lawmakers in Albany are considering a plan that would raise your heating costs by more than 25%. The reality is most people living on the edge financially have no idea what happens in Albany. It may sound like a good idea in the halls of the state capitol, and often sometimes means something entirely different in the homes of the people that we represent. Everything comes with a price tag, but the problem with government is that the bill is due, usually handed to somebody that has no choice in the matter. That's exactly what would happen under this bad legislation. It's why it's important that we stand here today and raise concerns. And it's why it's important that the media is here to get the word out to our voters that elect the people that make these kinds of decisions for them in Albany. As most of you know, I represent much of the Adirondack Park. The winter season is brutally cold. In fact, the capital of the Adirondacks, as they like to call themselves, the village of Saranac Lake, which straddles Franklin and Essex counties. Saranac Lake routinely records the coldest temperatures, not only in New York State, but in the entire country. And in fact, Saranac Lake is so cold that a number of years ago, a tourism campaign was launched to tout that unique distinction. They embraced it. We are the coldest place on the planet, Saranac Lake, that I represent. In the North Country, you'll see a lot of people who will stack firewood. in the fall, and that's next, by the way. We're going to probably go after the emissions from burning outdoors. But they'll stack firewood in the fall to heat their homes throughout the winter. But many aren't capable of doing that work. I'm barely capable of doing that work. Well, I used to do a lot of that work. But they have to pay for gas. They have to pay for their heating oil. They have to pay for propane. Higher cost means more of them won't be able to afford what is needed. And it will mean that more people will suffer, including the children and senior citizens. So in advance of this today, I made a couple quick calls to get some numbers. I have 2 BOCES in my region that cover almost the entirety of my Senate district, which is larger than Connecticut and Rhode Island combined. So almost all the school districts represented in these 2 BOCES, there are 37. 30 out of 37 school districts have free and reduced lunch eligibility for those kids at 40% or higher. 40% of the kids in 30 out of 37 school districts are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Many of them go into the 60% area. These are families that have a hard time feeding their kids, that we are subsidizing food on the dinner table, free breakfast, lunches. And now we're going to make it harder for them to heat their homes on the coldest place in the country. 2 of the counties I called, Essex County and Franklin County, combined between them, they have 5,500 people receiving Home Energy Assistance Program, or HEAP, benefits. 5,500 people in just 2 of my counties are eligible for HEAP in the coldest part of the country. And we're gonna tell them what? Put up a solar farm? Run around put on a sweater? That's the Democrats' answer to people in the North Country heating their homes? So when asked about our decades-long trend of losing representation in Congress, Governor Cuomo blamed the weather for out-migration. He may have been onto something with this bill. In reality, we all know New York State is the highest tax environment, and that's the real culprit that we have here. People vote with their feet when they've had enough. And when they can't afford to heat their homes, or they have to choose between heating their homes or feeding their kids, they're going to move to warmer climes. If this proposal becomes law, Cuomo's argument would be more accurate. People will be leaving because of cold weather, because they can't afford to heat their homes. And while proponents of this might call this legislation progressive, the reality is it would be extremely regressive. It would hurt the low-income New Yorkers that the other side of the aisle touts to be the champions of. Thank you, Leader.
Well, I want to thank my colleagues for their comments. I just want to close by once again returning to this idea of, the Democrats will have you believe that you either have to support policies like this or you don't care about the environment. Senator Steck represents the Adirondacks. The environment, I would argue, is more important to Senator Steck and the economy and his constituents than anybody else. Senator Matera from Long Island. The environment is very important to him and his constituents. But this bill doesn't get us closer. I've often said, I think it takes a certain level of arrogance to think we're going to solve the climate crisis right here from Albany. There's 49 other states. There's China. There's India. We need to get real here. All we're going to do is drive more people out of this state or make it much more difficult for them to be in this state. And there was a group of people that I also forgot about, which is there's a lot of folks that take public transportation, low income, minority communities. They take a bus up Ryan. They take a bus to go to work. This is going to cost a lot more to fill up that bus, which means one of 2 things, maybe both. They're going to either have to pay more to ride that bus, or we're all going to have to pay more to fund that bus so that it can still pick people up. Because at 55 cents a gallon, I can promise you, the NFTA and the Rochester Transit Authority and the Capital Region or District Transit Authority, that's going to significantly impact their viability and their solvency and their bottom line. And who are their customers? The very people, again, that our colleagues across the aisle proclaim that they care about exclusively. Well, this legislation says differently. And with that, certainly we'll take any questions.
You said that your conference does believe in protecting the environment, but simultaneously you suppose that have some counter offer for the Democrats, maybe a compromise that is a halfway point between an excessive tax and holding polluters accountable, as they have put it?
No, I certainly have no compromise on this bill. I'm not going to compromise against myself or negotiate against myself. This is not holding polluters accountable. What this is, in my view, this is about paying for a bill that created a council, the Climate Leadership Council, which hasn't even finished all their meetings. They haven't even made any recommendations yet. And we're already putting forth legislation that we believe is needed to pay for the legislation that created that council. We don't even have the recommendations because it's really not about what they recommend. I would argue this is about, I guess if you live in Manhattan, maybe you don't like people that drive cars. Well, guess what? My constituents and a lot of New York State, they need cars to get where they're going. And they should have the right to own a car to get where they're going. And taxing the hell out of them, which is what this bill would do, and then that's just the car. Then there's the home heating oil. So I'm not here to offer a compromise to them. We've lowered our carbon emissions by 95% since 1990. We're already lowering carbon emissions. In many cases, you have the industry, automakers, other corporate individuals or corporations. They are investing in new fuels and new technologies to lower their own carbon footprints. So many of these things are happening without this.
Yeah.
It's happening without this. This is unnecessary if your real goal is to reduce carbon emissions. If your real goal is something else, then maybe this is very necessary.
So practically speaking, have the measures that the state has already taken when it comes to creating clean energy and the ongoing projects, like the wind turbine project at the Port of Albany, do we just need to let those things work over time to see where we are in 5 to 10 years? Has the state already done enough work on the climate?
So I take issue with the premise of your question. Have we done enough on the climate? I mean, we don't know that answer. That's the real answer. But I think when it comes to any legislation, there are times you have to let the legislation. No one sold all these bills that tomorrow, once we pass it, it's all going to be fixed. So yes, I do think that some of these things you have to let play out. Again, in 1990, I highly doubt that anyone in this building would have predicted that our carbon emissions would have dropped 95% today, in that time. Because if you looked at the data from 1990, you extrapolate that out, you would have said it's going to keep going up and up and up, and none of us will be here, we'll all be underwater by 2001. That didn't happen. And it didn't happen for a lot of reasons and a lot of factors. Some things that were done here, but also things that are being done out in the private sector.
May I add something?
Yeah.
There is something that I did forget to mention, and I think it's important, and it echoes what the leader is saying, right? So if these businesses who are going to suffer from this increased tax, if they're a Title V permit holder, they've already been through a rigorous review process on emissions. They have to meet state and federal standards already. But under this bill, they're going to pay more. They're going to be taxed more. And first of all, I want to say this. If those companies decide it's too expensive to do business in New York State and they move out, they go to Tennessee or the Carolinas, the trend that we're seeing, right? Guess what? They're still going to be emitting the same carbon emissions in those states. And we all breathe the same air, right? It's not just emission standards in New York, it's worldwide, as the leader said. So that's one area where I think this bill falls short. The other area that really and truly personally makes me sick about this bill is those Title V permit holders who have been through, like I said, this rigorous review. They include not only businesses, they include our municipal water and sewer treatment plants, they include hospitals and colleges and so many more. They're doing everything they can. They want to be good partners in lowering the emissions, but if you read the language of this bill, the sponsor's memo and more, he takes joy. I wish I had it in front of me to read the exact language, but he takes pleasure in saying, we are going to generate from them millions and millions and millions of dollars. In other words, we're going to get them. We're going to get those business, and we're going to get that money, and guess what? We're going to take from the corporate folks, and we are going to give it to lower income New Yorkers. That's not good policy. You know what this bill lacks? This bill lacks saying to those businesses, we want you to do even more in transitioning to reduce your emission standards, and we're going to offer programs and resources to help you do that. No, what this bill offers is we're going to help transition employees away from those businesses and into other businesses. This is nothing, in my opinion, I can't speak for my entire conference right now, this is a political ploy. This is trying to get votes. It was put forward, as the leader said, by Senator Parker, who's running for another office. This is a ploy on his part. This is not going to address making us better stewards of this environment. As the leader said, we need to let the Climate Action Council, let them do their job, let them come back with their recommendations, and then move forward.
I do want to add, though, one thing to what Senator Helming said there. It may be a political ploy. I don't know. I don't look at it that way. This is a serious piece of legislation that has been introduced that can become law.
Right.
You guys figure it out.
But kind of adjacent to this, and you guys have kind of brought this up throughout this, how would you rate the state of the New York economy at this point? Things are starting to ease a little bit, pandemic-wise.
Sure.
But at the same time, New York's unemployment is higher than the rest of the national average.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good maybe metric or a good way to look at it. So, as restrictions are easing, certainly that's good. I think everybody would agree with that. I would like to see a lot more of that. But I think the unemployment is the concern, because the question becomes, are those folks going to go back to work? Are they making more off of the federal unemployment benefits that they don't need to go back to work? I hear from a lot of businesses, even as they're allowed to reopen, they can't bring people back to work, which limits their ability to actually open full steam. But I think the other question becomes, how many of those jobs that have been lost have been lost? In other words, they're not automatically coming back just because the governor says the restrictions are lifted, right? It's not, you can't close down large sectors of your economy, I don't believe, for the better part of a year, and then just flick the switch on and everything comes back. I think we have to grapple with the very real aspect that we are going to have to take action to help bring back our economy from New York City all the way to Saranac Lake, from Western New York all the way to Albany and then down to Long Island. We're going to have to take real measures, and I don't believe we're doing that, and I think we're actually taking action like this that could have a more deleterious or negative impact on our economy coming back. Because you're going to have employers right now, Nick, they're going to look and they're going to say, where is the best spot for me to invest my money to create more jobs and grow my business? Is that here, where my taxes went up, where the cost of doing business, because I have a fleet of vehicles, or my employees, their cost of working is going up? Or is it some other state where I don't have these same hurdles to doing business?
So the census numbers that a few of you referenced showed that the state's population grew by a much faster rate than the previous decade, over 20 million for the first time. What has changed that has led so many more people, or that has led the population here to improve so much in this decade compared to the previous ones?
Well, I'm going to say two things. One, I'm not a census taker, so I don't know the answer to that. I'll say this, though. The idea that we didn't lose two and we only lost one, if that's a definition of victory, God bless you. I don't look at it that way. I would also say that, look, when you do some of the things that we've done to attract people from all over the world with some of the handouts and some of the programs that we offer here in New York, the people who are coming here, they're not taxpayers in many cases, and we're losing our future generation of employees. In many cases, I know where I live, I know where many of my conference lives, those are the people who have left. Over the last decade, we've lost over 1 million people. That's why we're losing a congressional seat. So the argument that somehow yesterday's news was some great victory is just, I guess I don't know even what to say to it, because to me, the loss of a seat is the loss of a seat. We had 27 representatives before. Next year we'll have, or 2023, we'll have 26. Any way you slice it, that's one less person representing this state in Congress. And guess where that seat's going to come from? I'll tell you where it's not going to come from. It won't come from one of the 5 boroughs. I can guarantee you that much. And so constituents that I represent or that some of us represent, who already feel like they have no voice in Albany and in DC, are going to have one less.
Leader, can I just say something?
Sure.
There is no rosy picture about what happened yesterday. We're one of 7 states that lost another congressional seat. 43 other states grew faster than us. We're number 1, I believe, in out-migration. That includes people who died or left
Jimmy.
internationally.
Yeah. Jimmy.
Yeah. And we're number 4 now in population. Florida has moved ahead of us. All those are terrible indicators. Now, somebody said we were only 87 individuals away from continuing the representation we have. Well, the only thing that's good in coming close is horseshoes and hand grenades, okay? When 126,000 people left this year, 180,000 people the year before, and in 2019, when the governor says it's the weather, you know where 15% of the population went? New Jersey. Now, that's not the sunny, balmy place of the Northeast, exactly. So when enough people who can afford to leave the state of New York, who's left? Middle class and lower income. $212 billion budget. Who's going to pay for the infrastructure, education, health care, our senior citizen programs, our disabled individuals? Now you add to that, the answer to what took place yesterday is 55-cent increase on a gallon of gasoline and an increase to heat your home. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And I understand we're in a progressive state. There's one voice from one political affiliation, from one region of the state. But even a progressive agenda has to have a carve-out for economic development, job creation, and small business growth. And with the population leaving the way it is now, that agenda is not there. And we needed an agenda to add to that. So I don't think you can sugarcoat the good news about what took place yesterday. We're still one of 7 states that lost a representative. And when the governor says, we're not getting our fair share from Washington, we lost 13 congressional seats in the last 3 redistrictings. This is the 14th, I believe, with this redistricting. So we're not even holding down the fort right now. We're still bleeding populations. And the answer to attracting and keeping building here is people here is you got to build an agenda that does that for their quality of life. And what took place with this gasoline tax isn't a part of that.
Thank you, Senator Tedisco.
I'm curious
Last question.
open to off topics. What do you make of the governor's decision to allow press at his briefings, seemingly only outdoor briefings as of this week?
Well, I would say, what, you're doing your job now? You want an attaboy? I mean, this is what a press conference is. It's actually in the word, press conference. I can talk to myself anytime I want to, or these guys behind me. I mean, so I'm not going to give him credit because he's once again returning to the role of a public servant, which is answering questions from the public press corps. Thanks, guys.